Hello everybody and welcome back. In this Docker series, we are going to now go into Docker Compose. So let's get to it. So let's start by talking about what is Docker Compose. Now we discussed in the previous videos on Dockerfile how each container should be one service in order to make up our application, which is made up of multiple services or microservices. So we can use a tool like Docker Compose to allow us to put together multiple containers to run our application utilizing one command to bring up everything and one command to update everything and one command to bring it down. So as you can see, Docker Compose can be extremely powerful and useful. So what I decided in this video is instead of going into all the details and elements and concepts of Docker Compose, I'm just going to go ahead and create something using it to hopefully get you familiar with Docker Compose and how it works with all the elements that we learned in our previous videos in Dockerfile, however, using this handy utility. So the first thing that we want to do is install Docker Compose so we can use it. Now the quickest way to do this is to head on over to docs.docker.com compose install. The link is in the description. But since we're on the Linux subsystem for Windows, we're going to choose Linux from the top. And then we can go down to here on this first step 1 and copy this command. Bring up our Ubuntu shell and then right-click to paste it. Now if I reduce this down all the way, you can see the entire line is here. It just doesn't wrap on my system, even though I have wrap enabled. So at this point, we can go ahead and hit enter. And what this is going to do is ask us for our password. It'll go ahead and install the latest version of Docker Compose onto our system. Now, I already had Docker Compose on this. However, this allowed me to get the latest version. So now I know I'm up to date. Now, if we go into user local bin, you'll see that we have the Docker Compose placed in here. The issue now is it's not executable. So we now need to issue another command to change the mode of it to executable. You'll see that it turned green, saying that it's executable. So if I clear the screen, let's go back to our current directory. If I do a Docker Compose version, I now see that I have Docker Compose version 1.29.2, and we're ready to begin. So from our previous videos, if we do a Docker images, you'll see that we have the env_image that we used in our last Dockerfile video in that section of our series, and the MySSH server, as well as Ubuntu and WordPress. So for this particular video, I decided that maybe what we'll do is we'll deploy WordPress onto our systems locally, and then maybe even we'll throw it into AWS to have a little bit of fun and see how we can actually use this to point from the outside world. Remembering our commands from the previous Docker videos, you'll see that I have this image up here called none, and I want to kind of clean that up because I don't want that there. So very simply, I can do a Docker. First, we'll do a Docker PS and look at all of our Docker processes, and we'll see that we have nothing running. And if I had something running, if I try to remove an image that's in use, I'll get an error. So here I'm just going to do a Docker RMI to remove the image for this none, which has a ID of 6E9F. And I can continue in using the entire thing, or even if we want to be extra sure, I can double click it and then right click to place it into from the buffer into the command line, and I hit enter, give it a second, and we deleted that. So if we clear and do a Docker images again, you'll see that that's been removed. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up our directory structure so that we are nice and organized. I find it important to keep everything nice and organized. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new directory called projects. And within that projects directory, we're going to put all our different projects. And for this project, we're going to have WordPress. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm in the root of my home directory. I'm going to make a directory called projects. And then I'm going to cd into that projects and make a directory called WordPress. I'll clear the screen, and I'm going to touch docker-compose.yaml. Now, in the previous videos, remember I went ahead and I touched the Docker file in order to allow us the ability to edit this within Windows more simply by finding our way into the Ubuntu directory structure within the Windows subsystem for Linux. Instead of Docker file, this time we're using a file called docker-compose.yaml. And this is the file that Docker Compose looks for as its manifest file to build our full application for us. I'll go ahead and issue the explorer.exe for our current directory and drag over the Explorer window that opened up for us. And then, as I did in the others, I'm just going to right-click and open it with my Microsoft Code. Bringing this window over, which is my code window, we now have a nice blank file to begin the process of building our Docker Compose YAML file. So really quick, we're inside of this Docker Compose YAML file. And if you'll notice, the extension I used is YAML. You can also shorten that to YML. They're interchangeable, it doesn't matter. The second piece of the YAML file that I want to speak of is YAML works with indentation. So having proper indentation is crucial to making this work. So the indentation that I'll be using is 2 spaces for each indentation. So let's just go ahead and get this going. The very first thing at the very front of the file I'm going to choose is a version, and I'm going to say 1.9. Now this is just a versioning technique. It's not really that necessary anymore, I believe, in Docker Compose. However, just for completeness, I'll keep it in there. Now, the next section is services. Now, if you remember, we had spoken about containers being microservices, and the purpose of the Docker Compose is to help you take multiple containers or multiple services and put them together to work together with very simple commands. So here we're going to define what those services are. So underneath my services section, I'm going to go ahead and indent twice, and I'm going to define my services. So the first service I'm going to call WordPress. So we're going to have our first service that's going to be a container containing our web services, our WordPress application, and everything that makes that work inside of here. I'm going to do a double space, and in my second service is going to be my database. And inside my database, I'm going to have all of the things that are going to work towards making my database run, which in this particular case, we're going to be using MySQL. Now, again, this is not a course on MySQL or WordPress, so I'm not going to go into the details. Just know that WordPress relies on a database backend, and that database backend is MySQL. So within our services, I'm going to do another double space, and this is going to be the section inside of my WordPress where I'm going to define all the elements of the WordPress container that I find relevant. So the first thing that I'm going to add in here is the WordPress base image. Now this could be synonymous with the from statement in the Docker file from the previous. So here we define image. The image is going to be WordPress. And what I did is I went ahead and I found that the latest version is 5.8.1-Apache. So I just copied that into my clipboard and pasted it here. This will allow us to have that static tag to keep our builds consistent, and we can upgrade these tags manually on our own through CI/CD or our automation processes as we're implementing better, newer versioning. However, again, best practice, keep the tag. So on our database side, I'm also going to have an image, and that's going to be the MySQL image, and we're going to be using MySQL version 5.7 for this. Again, static tag. Now, here's a great example. If you were to move to MySQL version 8, which is out there, the whole dynamic of how MySQL changes, and we would have to change up everything that we're doing, and our entire Docker Compose file might change. The next section of my services for WordPress, I'm going to go ahead and stay indented all the way in underneath my image, and I'm going to define the ports that I want to publish. Now the ports are published by a list because I might have multiple ports that I want to publish out, and I can continue and place in here, let's say I wanted to do port 22 to port 22, etc., like this. I can continue to do ports like this, and it will expose port 8080 to port 80 and port 22 to port 22 from my host to my container. However, in this case, I don't need that extra. All I need is this single port to be exposed. Now on the database side, we don't need to explicitly expose a port to our host container because we're going to be linking the database to the WordPress container inside of Docker under the hood. There is no need to expose any ports for the MySQL here. So we're not going to do it. We're going to leave port out. Next, I'm going to go above the port and I'm going to add in my restart policy. So when do I want this WordPress container to restart if something goes wrong or there's a conflict with the container? What do we do if there was a reboot on the system, etc.? When the Docker engine restarts, it'll see that this policy was to restart, and it'll restart it. And in our case, we're going to say always. Now you have different options for restart, which is you can restart on failure, you can restart never, which would be no, which is the default, or unless stopped. So if we manually stop the container, we can set this to say, hey, keep on restarting unless I manually stop it. I also noticed in here that ports needs to be ports, and I was missing the plural. So this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to end it here, and we'll continue where we left off in the next video. Please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to continuing the discussion on Docker Compose in the next video.